Hi, I'm Tom Hess, and I'm glad that you've come here to check out this video on the guitar teaching business. Now, I'm going to assume that since you've done the search for guitar teaching business instead of guitar teaching skills, that what you want out of this video is to get some tips on the business side, the strategic side of how you can get more students, retain the students that you have already, get more referrals, and ultimately make a whole lot more money teaching guitar, and preferably spending less time actively working to do that. So here's what I'm going to share with you today. There are 4 primary areas, and then there's a special 5th area that I'm going to just briefly introduce to you, and then I'm going to give you some specific free online resources where you can learn more about these. The 4 primary areas for guitar teaching business, we're just talking about the business side now, not the teaching skills side. We could talk about that in another video. But for the business side, the 4 main areas are lead generation. That means basically getting prospective new students to contact you either by the phone or email or through your website or whatever. The second area is going to be conversion. So what you need to do is have some specific strategies that you're going to use and some specific steps that you're going to use when new prospective students contact you. You're going to need to do probably some things differently than you're doing right now in order for them to say yes to you instead of saying yes to somebody else, or instead of just not taking lessons at all and thinking that they're going to get the same result on their own, which of course they're not. So that's the second area. The third area is going to be retention. And this is a big one for guitar teachers, and frankly, even guitar teachers who are pretty good at getting new students, frankly, a lot of them don't do such a good job on keeping those students for long periods of time. What's a long period of time? Well, to me, a long period of time is more than 4 years. If you're keeping students more than 4 years, you're my hero. You're doing good. Okay? 4 years is considered a long period of time. But if you're keeping students for like 8-9 months on the average, or maybe a year, you probably can improve a lot on that. Okay? And not only is it about the business, but if people are only staying with you for a year or less on average, then that means they're probably not getting the full length of the result and the benefit out of you that they could be and should be. Okay? And it's not necessarily your fault if students don't stay with you, for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It may have nothing to do with your skills, but certainly there are specific things you can do to totally change that. Okay? So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The next area that you probably want to get much stronger in is referrals. And that's basically when your existing students or former students tell their friends or family members or whatever to come and take lessons from you. Now, you might think that word of mouth or referrals is something that just happens naturally, or should happen naturally, or is going to happen naturally, and the fact is that's just not true. It is true that some of your students will tell their friends about you, and you will get some students that way on a natural basis. That's correct. But very highly successful guitar teachers or business owners of any kind have very specific and very tangible, very implementable referral systems. So they don't just sit around and wait for their current students to tell all their friends, or they don't just say to their student, hey, if you have any friends who want to take lessons, send them my way. It's a whole lot more than that. It's very systematic, it's very effective, and it'll add so much to your bottom line and reduce a lot of stress and work that you have to do to constantly get new students actively if they're always coming in through referral. Okay? So those are the 4 key areas that you're really going to need to build on the business side of things. Now, I said there was one other special area, and that is your guitar teaching model. This is probably the most critical area in making massive amounts of money. What are massive amounts of money? How about $250,000 a year? That's what I make teaching guitar. That's not a joke. If you don't believe me, Google it. Anyway, guitar teaching models are either going to restrict your income or they're going to massively add more options for you to make a lot more money teaching. And here's basically how it works. If you teach private one-on-one lessons only, if that's the core of what you do, and it probably is, then you're automatically limited on how much money you can possibly make, right? I mean, there's only so many hours in the day that you can teach, and there's only so many hours in the day that your students can actually come to see you. So even if you worked 7 days per week, you're still going to have a glass ceiling above your head, and you're not going to be able to hit past that because you're going to eventually run out of time slots. Now, if your teaching schedule isn't full right now, you might be thinking, well, that's okay, Tom. If I can get 50 students or 60 students or 70 students, I'll be making so much more money than I am now, I'll be totally happy. Well, don't bet on that, okay? If you're teaching 60, 70 students, yeah, you may be making more money than you are now, but what you're also going to find out fairly quickly is you're going to get burned out real fast because all you're going to be doing is teaching, 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 teaching. And even though you probably love teaching as much as I do, you don't want to get burned out. You don't want this to be a job where you start dreading, teaching the next person because you're just doing so much of it, okay? And frankly, your students deserve more out of you and I than they're going to deserve if we're burned out. So what we need to do is take a more specific look at the model of teaching you're using so that, number one, you don't have this glass ceiling on your income, which only allows you to make $40,000, $50,000, maybe $60,000 a year. And number two, you don't get overwhelmed and burned out by all the massive amount of hours that you're putting into all that teaching on top of doing the lead generation and doing the conversion and doing the retention tactics and all those sort of things. So you really, if you already have a lot of students, then you know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of getting burned out by teaching so many all the time. If you don't have a lot of students right now, instead of thinking to yourself, my goal is to get 50 or 60 or 70 students, your goal should be to help a lot of people and make a lot of money, but not necessarily be working 60 or 70 hours a week. Okay, that's kind of crazy. And how long can you really sustain that in a healthy way? So I said in the beginning I'm going to have some free online resources for you to check out, and I do. Come to my website at the link below and begin by filling out some of these self-assessments. And what that's going to do for you is help define for you where your strong areas are and weak areas are in each of those areas, those 4 areas over here and the teaching model over here. That's going to help give you some clarity. Once you fill out that form and answer those questions, I'm going to give to you via email some very specific feedback on things that you can do to help yourself in all of those areas. I'll either give you specific advice or point you to an additional resource where you can get the advice, or just give you a tip on how you can take what you're doing now and just tweak it a little bit to make it much more effective. Okay, once you fill out those assessments, by the way, there are several of these, then I'll also give you some video where you can check out in specific detail what I was just referring to about the teaching business model, and show you how you can get started by teaching more people, making a whole lot of money, and not being totally burned out and overwhelmed in the process. So come to my website, check out the resource, the link below, and you'll be glad that you did.